So we're going to talk biofuels today with members of BioFuelNet, a network of researchers across Canada. And let's get right to it. Let's find out first off, where are we now in terms of biofuels, both in terms of research and in terms of use? Maybe Don, you want to start, Don Smith?
Sure. I would like to say first and foremost where we're not. So at least in terms of this group, we're not focused on converting food material into biofuel or any kind of fuel, really. So we're trying to look at advanced or next generation biofuels. We're trying to use lignocellulosic materials, algae, municipal solid waste, all of those other things that can be made into potential fuel without competing with food. This is probably in the long run just a non-starter, really. But anyway, that's where we are.
So not using food stocks.
That's correct.
Okay.
And where we are is right now, we have 2% biodiesel and 4% ethanol in cars. So that's the current situation, but that is primarily coming from those food sources such as ethanol from sugar and biodiesel from
soybeans,
animal fat.
Any being used now that comes from these second generation sources?
A little, but
very
not
little,
very much.
Very minimal.
Okay, Jean-Michel?
Yeah, but basically what's available right now is first generation, as they mentioned. So first generation is there. I don't think we should discard first generation right away because we are still working on second generation. Second generation is really close by, and as Don mentioned, second generation is mostly linked to a non-food material, non-food biomass. So basically we're going there when we're pushing forward with research and with our industrial partner to go there. What's available is first generation, but we're really tending toward second generation.
Okay. And then the question of where are we going? What is showing promise in terms of research? Who wants to jump in on that? Where's the promising research, and maybe give us some time frames, because I think the public is eager to know and to jump on board. Are we looking at a very long-term prospect for biofuels and cars and whatnot?
Yeah, well, the liquid fuel is, of course, a market that is really interesting. There is 40 billion liters of ethanol, of fuel used each year in Canada. So it's a big market. Actually, for second generation, there are two distinctive pathways. One is thermal, one is biological. So one uses microorganisms, like if you want to say bugs, and the other one uses high temperature. So at one point, there are many companies in Canada going forward, and 2013 is going to be the make or break of many of those companies. So at this point, I don't want to go too forward on such a statement, but I think thermo is going pretty well. Bio is there. As a matter of fact, both technology are, to a certain point, functional. The point right now is the economics. So both sides of conversion are really going into how can we perfect the economics and make it suitable, because after all, when you're producing ethanol, you're producing a commodity. So you have to be careful on the price that you have to invest for conversion of this biomass.
Murray, you want to jump in?
One success story is Enerchem's plant in out west in Edmonton, and it's under construction. That's right. Yep. And it'll be interesting to see how that works. But that's kind of an exciting story.
Tell us about Enerchem. What do they?
You're probably better suited than myself.
Well, Enerchem technology works with municipal solid waste, which are garbage that cannot be recycled or compost, and it has to be carbon based, so it has to have carbon in those wastes, and they're using this to produce a gas called syngas. Then this syngas is transformed into liquid fuel. So they went from lab scale at the University of Sherbrooke, then to pilot scale, then to demo scale, and now they're building a facility in Edmonton in Alberta for commercializing this technology. So when I said those technologies are really close to being commercial, it's one of the good examples of what's going on in Canada.
Can you be more specific in terms of the output of uses? How would this be used? In what?
Well, basically they're aiming at producing ethanol. So ethanol will be produced from garbage. So you put ethanol.
And you said 2013 is a big year.
It's a big year.
So what can we see down the pipe? This and anything else, or?
The other thing that's gotten a lot of interest is aviation biofuels. There's been a huge increase over the last 3 years or so, 3 to 5 years on aviation biofuels, and a lot of interest. There's a challenge is making it cheap enough to be competitive with alternatives, but definitely a lot of interest from.
And some are using it now. Like KLM, is KLM the airline?
A lot of them have had trial flights now. A lot. So Air Canada
Yeah, recently there was a trial of Bombardier aircraft using Pratt & Whitney Canada engines flown by Porter, from I believe Toronto to Montreal probably,
So.
and it used biofuels.
100% biofuels?
On that flight, I couldn't say whether it's 100% or 50%, but there is the international organizations have a standard that typically it's a 50% blend, and but that would make a huge difference. Now, of course, most airplanes run on 0% biofuels, so that would be quite a change.
But I can imagine the feedstocks just to do that.
And this is a very pertinent question, because I think that right now, I think as Jean-Michel said, we're starting to get there with the conversion. And once you get past the conversion issues, then it becomes about feedstocks. And so we've been approached by Airbus and Air Canada, who want us to make an assessment of how much feedstock is available that can be sustainably extracted year over year. So for manufacture of aviation biofuels, so they can fly their jets. And their view is, I think, that given the number of test flights that existed now, and that the conversion technologies are coming along, that they want to know if there's enough feedstock material available so that they can make enough fuel to make investing in a significant conversion plant, biofuel conversion plant, worthwhile over the long term. And if there is, their attitude seems to be, then they're interested in doing that. If there isn't, they're not. But we're kind of at that stage.
And of course, I think we should underscore the point, you mentioned it briefly before, but you're looking at, all this research is really looking at land that's not already in use for food, and even non-arable land, and you're looking for things that'll grow in places that...
That's right, and part of the work, just where I am, we're doing work with trying to develop technologies that will allow plants to grow under more difficult conditions, grow successfully under more difficult conditions, because we'll be on marginal lands and things like that. We hope to stay as much as possible out of conflict with food production, so we don't want to use food materials, and we don't want to push food materials off land where it could be grown, where they could be grown.
There's also a lot of interest with waste materials from the forestry industry.
Yeah, and some of the stuff from agricultural residues and things like that. A lot of that, but municipal solid waste is golden, obviously. Whenever you can turn a waste stream into a resource stream, this is a very good thing. So,
depending on the type of waste you're using, technology may be adapted to different types of feedstock. So feedstock has a price, and according to this, you can adapt the conversion technology. And as an example, when you're using residual agriculture or forest biomass, instead of using producing only ethanol, you can produce other compounds, really interesting compounds that could be used by the industry as solvents, as monomer for polymers, as an example. So you get more from your biomass.
What are the main, we've talked about some of them, but there are more hurdles. When you talk about the electric car, there's just the installations of it all. Maybe biofuels just for the auto industry is not as challenging. You've just replaced what's in the tanks, I suppose, a little bit, but it's easier. Or what are some of the hurdles to, once you have the biofuels, to just distributing it?
And, I think Jean-Michel said earlier, we shouldn't throw away the first generation ones right away, because there are distribution networks, for instance, for ethanol. And we wouldn't want to have a period where they stop using them and they were abandoned and then have to set them back up again. Because, for instance, part of the material that will come out of these novel feedstocks, these new feedstocks, non-food feedstocks, is ethanol, just derived a different way. And so they don't need the same distribution system. So we want to hang on to it.
Go ahead, Murray.
I think a big challenge, of course, is getting large amounts of feedstock at a cost that the system can be economically viable at, and that's a challenge. And there's lots of people in the network looking exactly at that issue.
Okay.
And I think on the conversion level, because as long as you're producing ethanol, of course you're right, you can just put it in a gas tank as other ethanol. But the point is, conversion is at this point now where they're really close to being commercial, and they're reducing on the cost of their process, just to be able to make it and do the leap of faith and be able to sell it as a commodity.
Right, so the consumers are willing.
Yeah.
It becomes reasonable. What about policy? There's got to be a few hurdles related to just getting...
Sure, we have policy. In the U.S., they have policy that continues to ramp up the amount of biofuels they want to see used, and particularly ramping up now with the advanced biofuels. So getting off the food materials. Here in Canada, we have a policy of 2% biodiesel, 5% ethanol and gasoline. But there's really no advance beyond that. Nobody's thinking beyond that, as far as I can tell at this point, and we need some leadership there.
And by setting more goals, do they match it with the research funding to make it happen, or?
Yeah, usually research funding and other incentives. They'll provide a certain amount of tax breaks, et cetera, subsidies, whatever, to the industry while it's getting established. And just by way of being defensive on the subsidy issue, people do go on about subsidies for the biofuel sector, et cetera, but what people don't generally realize is the fossil fuel sector gets a fair amount of subsidy every year from various programs as well. So when they talk about a level playing field for subsidies, we should get more. So anyway.
It's just important to realize that you can't just put any biofuel in any tank of any vehicle. Every vehicle has very strict standards as far as what you can put in. For instance, cars nowadays are certified for 10%, 15% ethanol, but you couldn't just put 80% ethanol in your,
believe me,
your
I've
standard,
had personal
your standard
experience
car.
with that. I know. Too much ethanol can stall a car, or it just doesn't
But
function.
if you go to Brazil, they run flex fuel vehicles. Almost
That's
their
right.
entire surface transport fleet is flex fuel vehicles. And when you pull up to the pumps in Brazil, you get a price for gasoline, price for 20% ethanol, 80% gasoline, and a price for ethanol. And depending on the price, they'll buy one or the other. So the blend in their tank is random depending on what they've bought over time recently. And the engine detects the mixture and sets the engine accordingly.
So their cars are different.
They have an extra piece of technology added on?
They're designed for that. So they have a sensor in the fuel line that senses how much ethanol, and then they make adjustments to the engine operating procedures so that it's run for that fuel mix. So they're sensing it in the engine.
So the technology exists,
Exists,
and it's
yes.
proven.
So that
the technology exists.
Okay, so that people will not have to run out and get new cars necessarily.
If, for instance, in Canada, you wanted to say 80% ethanol today, most cars out there. There's some cars in Canada even that could do it, flex fuel cars. You sort of see them sometimes on the road, but the majority of cars are not set up for, say, 80% ethanol. Not that we're anywhere near there, but the technology exists. It just the automotive manufacturers would have to slowly integrate flex fuel ethanol cars into the mix. So the technology is there. It's just a matter of deploying that technology. There's a small cost to it, but if they did see that there was the quantity of ethanol available, definitely the automakers would modify their cars to be able to handle that.
Well, that sort of leads to my next question. Are the automotive companies involved in any way? Are they partners with BioFuelNet? Are we consulting with them?
Yeah, we have a number of engine manufacturers. Certainly, Ford is a major participant, but and also the aerospace guys are involved in a very significant way. Rolls-Royce, Pratt & Whitney. We have a strong involvement with the engines of both those types.
I'd like to get a sense from each of you of what kind of researchers are involved in BioFuelNet, because it goes right down to the cellular level, doesn't it? So you've got all kinds of people across Canada in 4 regions. Maybe you can explain how the network works.
We have, from molecular geneticists manipulating, for instance, yeast or the genetic makeup of potential feedstock crop plants so that they are more easily broken down by yeast. All these different things are more amenable to, say, a thermochemical conversion into syngas. We have people working at those levels. We have people working at sort of production of crops in the field. We have people working in conversion, both thermochemical and biochemical. We have people working in utilization, looking at engine performance, long-term engine performance. So you can't put something in an engine where you burn it for 1,000 hours and then suddenly it shortens the life of the engine significantly. I think, Maria, in fact, if you burn something in your engine, if it's one of those expensive engines in a truck or a tractor, and then it's not certified, your warranty can be void, I think. Is that right? Yeah,
and that would be particularly true for aviation biofuels. There are very strict standards on what fuels can go into airplanes, of course, and they very rigorously control for that, because obviously in an airplane.
Yeah. So burning out an engine because you've used an untested fuel, if you're in surface transport, that's expensive. If you're in air transport, that's really serious. Yeah. So so there are all those kinds of issues
and
involved too.
And you have policy people looking at.
We have a theme called social, economic, and environmental sustainability. So SEAS for an acronym, and their whole job is to look at everything else we're doing, and make sure we're not pursuing technology path that for some reason is socially unacceptable, economically unviable, environmentally not compatible, and so then they keep us away from those sorts of tracks. And they also deal with potential policy. And we have links with government. We have people at least that keep us apprised of what's going on and try to keep them apprised of what probably should be going on. So yeah, we have some influence. We have people who think about policy, and I hope we have some influence on policy.
You want to tell me about your areas, the East platform?
Yeah, the East platform integrates all the themes that Don mentioned. So we have feedstock, people producing biomass, people converting biomass into biofuels, commodities, if we can say. We have people utilizing those products, testing in engines or testing for added value products, and people on the seas that looks around everything around the concept, the economics, the environmental aspects. So this is the East platform. On my side, and personally for my research, I work on conversion, which is really taking the biomass, as an example, biomass that Don would produce in the field, and converting it to a specific fuel. In most cases it's ethanol, but we're also looking into other options. But of course, as Murray mentioned, you cannot just produce a compound and put it in an engine. You either create or make a compound that is exactly what they're using right now, or you have to test it, and this is where people in utilization are really close by.
Where the rubber hits the road.
Literally.
Tell us about where it is at in conversion technology.
I'm the co-leader of the utilization theme, and we have people looking at gasoline or spark ignition engines, diesel compression engines like that would be in a truck, also aviation biofuel, aviation combustion, and also new engines. There's these called HECI engines, which is sort of an engine that is more sort of looking in the future. And in all those cases, they're looking at the current biofuels, also some proposed sort of advanced biofuels like butanol, for instance, and they're looking at what would be the effect of using that. How can we help the manufacturers integrate those new biofuels or existing biofuels into their engine and engine design processes, because engines are very carefully designed for a very particular fuel they're using. So you change the fuel, you have to change the design process.
Right. So this is just what's happening in Canada. BioFuelNet regroups all the researchers in Canada, most of them anyway, in biofuels. How does that fit in with the global effort?
Sure, I think there are a number of countries where they've taken similar approaches. So they have networks, somewhat like ours. I think Canada's been very good about networking. So when I contrasted with the U.S., there are networks there too, but they're not as big on this as we are. But having said that, we do bring everything together in this country, and we have made a large effort, and we're expanding that effort, I hope, to develop international connections. And that's probably where we're particularly unique. You have these national networks. To have an international network that's really tied into the world in this is pretty rare. So I think that's where we bring something quite unique to the whole equation. So we're hoping to make significant progress there. But we've just signed a series of memorandum of understanding for cooperation with Brazil. We have one in place with India. We're just developing several with the U.S. We'll probably bring back a couple from China this summer. Now, a memorandum of understanding is just it's an agreement to do stuff, do things, and we have to settle on concrete activities now. But certainly, this is coming along. So
it's a competitive area of research, though, because there's a lot of money at stake, both involved in doing the research and potentially afterwards.
Yeah.
Does that affect the amount of cooperation?
We do this. The researchers collaborate. Industry's involved. In general, a given research project has a given research partner, and they're likely to acquire the technology that's developed. So there's a bit of caution in terms of the interactions that happen at some points, but we try to encourage these collaborations as much as possible, and we try to do it without compromising the intellectual property that could be associated with the research that goes on. It's a fine line to walk, but we've been reasonably successful so far, I think. So I think it can be done, but it has its challenges. There's no question.
You'll forgive me if I ask an unfair question now to round things out, but I think people would like to know your best guess. How many years are we away from seeing fossil fuels really take if not a backseat, seeing biofuels begin to seriously replace fossil fuels? I mean, are we generations away? Is that too much of an unfair question?
I would guess a generation over the course of the kids that are born now. By the time they're my age, it depends on a few things, right? It'll depend in part on the price of oil or other fossil fuels, and it will depend on climate change conditions. We haven't mentioned this yet, but we have this interesting situation where, well, when I was born, the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere is about 310, and we're just crossing 400 now. It's a lot in one lifespan. So we need to be concerned about that and everything that comes with that. So over the course of for the next generation, there needs to be a lot of effort on this. I mean, they're going to pay for it. I mean, when they talk about climate change effects, it's not our grandchildren anymore, it's our children. And so there's an issue there that needs to be addressed. So how much the policy folks get wound up or focused on or concerned about the climate change aspect will be one thing. Availability of fossil fuels and price of fossil fuels will also be another thing. And how those two interact in the realm of policy will have a lot to do with it. But at some point, we're going to need the fossil fuels, and we need to get them as ready as we can, as soon as we can, so that when the moment comes, we're not suddenly in this point where we have a gap, where there's a fuel limitation which can have catastrophic effects on society. So we just don't want that. So we have to be ready. If we can get this stuff out there so that to the point where it's actually price competitive with fossil fuels, perfect. But if we have to wait till the price of current fossil fuels rises a bit, so be it. But we need to be ready.
Murray, what would you say to that question?
I'd just like to emphasize the role of government policy. It has a very important role in the deployment of biofuels, and so that's something that depends on sort of government policy. So
and government policy sometimes depends on public demand, eh?
That's true.
The electorate definitely exerts pressure on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think biofuels will progressively increase in the Canadian pool of fuel progressively. So to what point it will be replacing fossil fuel, it's hard to tell, as Don mentioned. So, but the important point and where conversion kicks in, we have to work, and this is where research is also really important. We have to work on a process that will allow people that want to develop this industry to make money out of it. Otherwise, nobody will come forward and do, oh, I want to do second generation biofuel. So this is where research is really important. We are helping those people to go forward with those new technology and be able to implement this new industry in Canada.
Is there, finally, just one last thing, is there something that people interested in this issue can do to encourage policymakers to be more focused on biofuels?
When they're contacting their politicians, let them know. I mean, if you have children, climate change should be a concern.
Thank you all very much.